Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion where we're going to be making some predictions about the opening weekend of the Forbidden Sanctum 320 Path of Exile League and what choices players are going to make for their skill selections as they league start, rushing their way to maps to begin enjoying and finding all of the loot or lack thereof that is awaiting us in the endgame experience for 320. If you're new to the channel, then this is a pretty typical discussion that we like to have around here where we throw a whole bunch of data out there, take a look at it, and then begin to shape and craft and tell a story with the data that we've observed. Our first question to ask today about data is what's changed due to patch notes for the upcoming 320 Forbidden Sanctum League? That's where we're going to start our search. We need to know what skills used to be popular and then identify what skills might be popular based off of what skills that used to be popular that got smacked or used to be unpopular and maybe got buffed. So what we're doing today is we're taking a look at some patch notes info, we're taking a look at some old PoE Ninja data, and then we're going to try and make some predictions about what the meta is going to look like. The table that you are now seeing on your beautifully displayed screen shows you the first 3 days of the Lake of Kalandra 319 League. These particular screenshots are from day 1, day 2, and day 3 of the experience-based ladder as displayed and saved on PoE Ninja. If you're taking a look at the skills that are being used by players in 5+ links, we see that Spectral Helix came in at the top spot on day 1, day 2, Righteous Fire comes in at the top spot, and day 3, Righteous Fire was still the most popular skill for Lake of Kalandra. One thing that I need to continually say today, and you'll need to continually remember as we're having this discussion, is we're just talking about the opening weekend here. We're not making predictions about the entirety of the league. We're just taking a look at opening weekend and seeing what players are choosing to use for their league starters. While Spectral Helix and Righteous Fire took the dominant positions for most of the first couple of days of really the first week of Lake of Kalandra, there were other skills that also got touched in the patch notes as well, and by touched we mean changed, and by changed we mean nerfed. Lightning Conduit as well as Lightning Strike and Vol Lightning Strike all got hit in the patch notes, and that means that while these might have been preferred player choices for 319 Lake of Kalandra, they most likely will not be preferred player choices for the opening weekend of Forbidden Sanctum. This is a blank page. It's got no data on it. Maybe I'm supposed to say a joke here. Maybe there's no joke. Maybe my forehead. Maybe that's just the joke. What if someday I shoot an entire video just with my... The first skill that got hit was Spectral Helix. It was the dominant skill on day 1. It was still a pretty popular skill day 2, but by day 3 it had already dropped down to only 4% of the player base actually using Spectral Helix on their main 5+ links. The specific change in the patch notes reads as follows. Spectral Helix now has 100% effectiveness of added damage at gem level 1. It previously used to be 160%, up to 150% at gem level 20, previously 250%. Essentially, one way to think about how big this nerf is to Spectral Helix is to say that at gem level 20 now, it's going to have the gem level added effectiveness of less than what it used to have at gem level 1. That's a pretty big smack. I think it's fairly safe to say that Spectral Helix is no longer going to be simply the go-to, easy to slap on and just level with skill that it used to be. In fact, as I've come back to playing Path of Exile over the last couple of weeks, and I've just been leveling around and messing around, when I booted up for the Delirium event, I actually just threw Spectral Helix on, and it felt tremendous and really easy to play the game. So I can understand why it got smacked. But again, because it got smacked, I doubt players are going to be picking it in the upcoming 320 Forbidden Sanctum League as heavily as what they did beforehand. You're now basically only going to see dedicated Spectral Helix fanboys playing it. Next up is Righteous Fire. Righteous Fire went up in its popularity over the first 3 days. Day 1 going at 6% of the league playing it on their main 5 links. Day 2 up to 8%, and day 3 up to 9% of the league that was playing it. It was trending upward and carrying away as more players began to spec into and have gear available to allow them to spec into Righteous Fire. The specific change that happened in patch notes really wasn't about Righteous Fire as much as it was about the ascendancy that was incredibly popular and associated with Righteous Fire during the Lake of Kalandra League. This is the change that came to the Inquisitor ascendancy that is most likely going to impact players' choices and the popularity of Righteous Fire reflected in those player choices in the first 3 days of the upcoming Forbidden Sanctum League. Here's the change to Pious Path. The recovery provided by the consecrated ground you create causes life regeneration. To also recover energy shield for you and your allies on Pious Path is significant on its own, so having 50% increased effect of consecrated ground you create on top of this feels overboard. So what'd they do? Well, they simply remove 50% increased effect of consecrated ground you create. Now, I want to share this little piece of wisdom here because Righteous Fire is actually going to be kind of interesting to think about and chat about. On the one hand, because Inquisitor is the thing that got changed, Righteous Fire itself is still very viable as a skill, and any other ascendancy that can play it and build around it, and all the items in and around it are still usable. It's not as though player fire resistance all of a sudden got recapped out at like 65%. By the way, Chris, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not making that suggestion for Ruthless mode. What I'm saying is instead of an actual change to Righteous Fire as a gem, what changed is just an ascendancy that Righteous Fire happened to be played on and was very popularly played on. So, with the change to the ascendancy, it doesn't necessarily mean that players aren't going to play Righteous Fire anymore. It might mean, though, that as a league starter, it might be a little bit more tough to get up and running, since recovery is oftentimes one of the most obnoxious parts of dealing with Righteous Fire as you are switching to it and gearing for it as you are either leveling or beginning your mapping progress. By the way, Pox, who is a tremendously knowledgeable and wise and veteran player on all things Righteous Fire, he's got a tremendous amount of wisdom. He was talking about it the other day on his stream. I actually clipped some of his wisdom, and that clip is going to be included down below in the video description if you want to watch it. Pox's take, if you don't click on it, is basically this. Righteous Fire is still fine to play, and most oftentimes, at least according to him, when you're dying, when you're playing as an Inquisitor, it's most often because of a massive hit, a single massive one-shot. It's not because of your lack of regeneration. So that was his take, that Juggernaut and Inquisitor are basically both still very viable, and that it's a personal preference thing for playing Righteous Fire. But anyway, don't take my word for it, because I'm not the Righteous Fire expert. In fact, oftentimes when I've got questions about all things Righteous Fire, I go and take a look at what Pox has got to say on a question about Righteous Fire. Next up is Lightning Conduit. Here's the change and the stats. The stats for Lightning Conduit are simply day 1, 4% of the league were playing it. Day 2, 5% of the league was playing it. And then day 3, once again, 5% was playing it during the Lake of Kalandra opening weekend. The change that came through in the 320 patch notes is as follows. Lightning Conduit now deals 33 to 98 lightning damage at gem level 1. Previously 43 to 130. Up to 387 to 1161 at gem level 20. Previously 516 to 1548. Wow, that's the year I was born. It now has 140% effectiveness of added damage. Previously 190%. This is a significant nerf, a big enough nerf that for a gem that is not necessarily well-beloved or has a massive fan following or a history of a massive fan following, right? It's not going to allow it really to continue in its top spot, at least as popular as it was during Lake of Kalandra. It apparently had its moment of brightness in the sun, its 15 minutes of fame, and it's probably going to see its way dropping down the charts moving forward. Next up is Lightning Strike and its Vol version, Vol Lightning Strike, which made up a pretty decent chunk of the player base and simply rose up in popularity throughout the league, as well as over the opening weekend. Day 1, it was 2% and 2% respectively. Day 2, it was 6% and 6%. And then day 3, 9% and 9%. GGG saw fit to smack this sucker real hard, and this is what they did. Lightning Strike now fires 2 additional projectiles at all gem levels. It previously was 4 at gem level 1, up to 7 at gem level 20. Quality on Lightning Strike no longer provides increased damage. Quality on Vol Lightning Strike no longer provides increased damage. Quality on Divergent Lightning Strike no longer fires 0 to 2 additional projectiles. Instead, it now provides with a chance to shock enemies. And the Labyrinth Helmet enchantments that cause Lightning Strike to fire additional projectiles now have values of 1 and 2. Previously, it was 2 and 3. This is huge. This is huge for its clear. It's also huge for essentially for taking down bosses or even mobs inside a boss arena. This is a pretty big nerf to Lightning Strike. There's no two ways about it. There's no way to sugarcoat this. This thing at level 20 is now it's just capped at 2 additional projectiles on the gem itself. You can still add projectiles through all sorts of other different support gems and all sorts of different mechanisms. For instance, still the helmet enchantment, right? You can still add some of those particular projectiles, but you're not going to get anywhere close to the projectiles that you used to be able to get to simply by leveling up the gem. The old level 20 gem used to have 7 projectiles. Now, to get to that same 7, you're not going to get there by getting your gem level to 20. You're still only going to be firing 2 projectiles. And even if you had the top tier helmet enchant with your level 20 gem, you're now only firing 5 projectiles. That's with a top tier helmet enchant and a level 20 skill gem. What the gem used to be able to do basically as it was still leveling. Yeah, that's going to feel real bad. So it's pretty safe to say Lightning Strike and its Vol version are most likely not going to be on the anywhere close to the most popular spots for the opening weekend of the 320 Forbidden Sanctum League. In fact, I would think if it is representative whatsoever, again, it's simply because of dedicated players who are just going, well, whatever, you and your Nerfs, get off my lawn and I'm still going to play it anyway. Just for a moment, we're going to move from stuff that got hit to all the stuff that was popular during the Lake of Kalandra opening weekend, but didn't get hit. So while things like Spectral Helix got hit, stuff like Poisonous Concoction did not get hit. Righteous Fire, the ascendancy that it was played on, got hit, but the actual spell gem itself didn't get hit. Spark didn't get hit. Explosive Arrow didn't get hit. Venom Gyre not only didn't get hit, it's got a Vol version now. Blade Vortex as well, which not only did it not get hit, if you're playing a poison-based version of Blade Vortex, you might actually have increased damage due to some bug fixes announced in the patch notes. Lightning Arrow, Wave of Conviction, even Eye of Winter, and other things like Summon Raging Spirit and Fire Trap. All of these things showed up as relatively popular skills in the first 3 days of the Lake of Kalandra League, and none of them got hit in the patch notes for 320 Forbidden Sanctum. This list gives us a pretty wide range of skills that players might be taking a look at, and this is before players consider even new skills that are getting released or old skills that were somewhere between super duper popular and not necessarily super duper popular, but might, due to different changes on the passive tree or other uniques coming out or simply other changes in players' preferences or ascendancies, might also shake up the meta. So there's a lot of options for us to look at when we're considering making predictions for the upcoming opening weekend. So we've taken a look at what was good at the opening of the league and didn't get hit by patch notes, but what about stuff at the end of the league that didn't get hit? Well, stuff that was super duper popular at the end of Lake of Kalandra was, of course, Lightning Strike and Vol Lightning Strike, which shared 21% of the player population. Righteous Fire was also up there at 9%. Again, Righteous Fire kind of in a strange category because Righteous Fire itself didn't get hit, but its most popularly played ascendancy did. Lightning Conduit was still up there with 3% of the player base. But other than that, the rest of the stuff at the top of the player charts for 319 Lake of Kalandra, this stuff didn't get hit. It was not nerfed during the patch notes. Fire Trap, 9% of the player population. Ice Spear, 8%. Cyclone, 8%. Tornado Shot, 6%. Spark, 5%. Freezing Pulse, 5%. Divergent Cyclone, 5%. Creeping Frost, 4%. Vol Lightning Strike, that's the anomalous version, anomalous Lightning Spear. Kinetic Blast, 4%. Forbidden Right, 3%. Divergent Tornado Shot, that's another 3%. Blade Vortex, 3%. Vol Blade Vortex, also 2%. Explosive Arrow, and then Divergent Venom Gyre. So you might be seeing a little bit of a pattern here. Some of the stuff that was good at league start was still relatively popular. It was still at least showing up on the first several skills in terms of player population count at the end of the league and was still somewhat usable at the end. So there's a little bit of a trend, not necessarily direct causation or direct correlation between what's good at the start of the league and what's good at the end, but there's at least some skills that players choose to start the league with, and then they push forward and onward into the top ends of player available experience on their characters. Also, it's worth noting that there's several skills that got Vol versions of them. For instance, we've already mentioned it, Vol Venom Gyre, and then Vol Caustic Arrow. These also might be factors that players are taking into consideration as they are building their POBs, taking a look at what everybody else is playing, and then considering, yep, do I actually want to play this? Yeah, it looks good. Let's try it. All right, 3 observations to make here before we make some predictions, just based off of all the data. First off, popular skills might be relatively low in terms of their percentages of players using them opening weekend. Anything between 2% to 12% of the player population on day 1 usage, for example, might represent a dominant skill later on in the league. Skills don't need to be 50% of the player base using them on day 1 in order to indicate that later on in the league, they'll actually be a relatively dominant or popular skill. Secondly, it may only take one player to discover a skill that will be then deemed meta later. Players copy one another in Path of Exile. It's a big part of why Path of Exile is such a community-oriented game, right? I mean, we've got Path of Building. Like we have third-party tools that are dedicated to the ability just to share our builds with one another, right? The forums are filled with awesome people who take time out of their day to build guides to help other players enjoy the game itself through similar character creations that they themselves have experienced and can say these are top-notch and fun ways to play the game. During a league start, oftentimes meta changes very, very rapidly around what players discover, and a couple of different factors are involved there. One might be a skill and its ease of use. One might be a particular interaction that players figure out. Another could be interacting with the particular league mechanic that is prevalent and available that league. Maybe there's a particular skill that is particularly good in a particularly league challenge environment. And so it's very, very interesting to see. It only can take maybe a few players, maybe even only one player, to find a skill that's actually ridiculously bonkers in the current state of Path of Exile. And then many other players follow suit. So in other words, something might not even be popular during opening weekend, but later on turn out to be super duper meta because players have either acquired items to make it so that way a particular build has been unlocked, or it could simply be through discovery. One player does one thing, other players start to copy it, other players then start to iterate on it, and boom, before you know it, overnight as it were, it seems, an entire meta is formed. All right, the third observation is that the popularity of skills is only representative of ladder players, not every single player in the game. That's something just to always keep in mind. This is only representative of players whose level of experience on their characters is actually hitting the requirements to be displayed on the ladder. This is not representative of 100% of every single player who boots up and logs in and runs through the Twilight Strand and makes it to Lionel's Watch. That is not representative of the numbers that we're taking a look here on PoE Ninja. So you just got to be aware of that. This is not representative of the total sum of the player base. This is a representation of the players who are pushing for ladder and gaining experience in the first 3 days. And that's not everybody. So just be aware of that. Some skills and some ascendancies do drop off after the opening weekend, and some skills and some ascendancies are chosen specifically just to get players to a specific spot where they'll then later respec their character into a completely different build. Sometimes there are skills that players choose to use for leveling through the 10-act story campaign or even into early maps, and then they switch into something else later on down the line. One of the things that I like and that I'm excited about doing about these prediction videos is we're doing them this week as we're leading up into the league. And it's really exciting because, like, in a week, we'll be able to look back at it and go, oh, yeah, we were totally right. Or, oh, man, we totally missed the boat on that one. It's going to be fun. All right, so with all the data out there, we've started to craft a little bit of a story of what the meta might look like. So I'm going to give you my predictions at this point. Feel free to, of course, drop a comment down below with any of your predictions about what skills you think players are going to be choose to play in the upcoming 320 Forbidden Sanctum opening weekend. In the humble opinion of your favorite balding, bearded, geriatric, screeching gamer, I think that opening weekend might look something like this. These are not ordered by percentages. I just think that this is what a top 10 could potentially look like for the opening 3 days of Forbidden Sanctum. I think Vol Venomgeyer is going to get a lot of play. Venomgeyer on its own already got play. Now there's going to be a Vol version of it. I think that's going to add to a lot of players wanting to play it. Seismic Trap, I think the changes to Poison are probably going to mean that some players are going to try playing Seismic Trap as a Poison-based build, and it's already decent for a lot of players who are trying to push ladder early on. Poisonous Concoction is very, very easy to get set up and to be smoothly leveling through the 10x story campaign. It's generally become a pretty much a well-rounded and well-accepted leveling skill for a lot of what I will say are more casual players. It's not necessarily a super complex skill. There's not a lot of stuff that you really need to have going into it. Pretty simple, pretty easy. You grab Poisonous Concoction and you start running through the campaign and you kill stuff relatively easily. Apologies for the typo up here, but Caustic Arrow is also getting a Vol version. I think that that's going to be a big reason for why Caustic Arrow is going to get played during the opening weekend. Caustic Arrow does oftentimes see gameplay during the opening weekend of leagues, and now with a Vol version that's added on top of that, I think it's just going to add to the attractiveness of this particular skill that's already a relatively tried and true skill. And of course, the changes to poison and the damages that are going to be available through poison now are also going to make any skill that can poison much more attractive for opening weekend. Toxic Rain, another tried and true, well and popular opening skill for many different players. It's similar in some regards to Poisonous Concoction in that players oftentimes can simply feel at ease with it. There's a lot of players who feel like they are comfortable leveling using Toxic Rain. It's something that they can fall back on. It's something that's relatively speedy for players since you can back up your damage with Mirage Archer. And so that's a quality of life thing that a lot of players who maybe aren't necessarily in the racing category but feel like they want to progress and push at a relatively high level, do feel like they can put that on, slap that on, and away they go through the 10x story campaign and get into maps right away on day one. I've included Spark on here for a couple of reasons. I think we might be, do I even want to risk saying this and then eating crow later on? What the heck? I eat crow on plenty of things. I think we might be entering into like a Spark Poison kind of league meta. It's possible. All right, just hear me out. If Poison is going to do more damage, if Poison was bugged beforehand and is now genuinely fixed and is going to do more damage, I think we're generally headed into a Poison meta. When you head into a Poison meta, one of the things that oftentimes players like to do is apply as many poisons as they can as quickly as they can, and that means lots of different sources that are applying those poisons. One of the ways to do that, there's hundreds, thousands potentially of different ways to do that in Path of Exile. One of them, though, is to use Spark. So whether or not Spark is played primarily as essentially as an elemental-based skill, or if Spark is played in some form of a poison-based skill, either way, I think Spark not getting hit in the patch notes, being relatively popular last league start and being relatively popular throughout the league and towards the end of the league, I think Spark has got a good chance of showing up both on the opening weekend and potentially throughout the entirety of the rest of the league. And everything that I've said about Poison so far can be said about Vol Blade Vortex. This is, again, another skill that can take advantage of heavy applications or fast applications of a whole bunch of poison stacks. And that's just a wonderful way to either delete bosses or delete whole screens or even potentially delete whole maps in relatively short order. Now, making an appearance for the first time in what might be a very, very long time and maybe is a pretty far out there prediction is Vol Molten Strike. I think Molten Strike, again, because of poison changes, might be an opportunity for Molten Strike to come back into the opening meta. Anything that can fire off tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of projectiles and apply just giga amounts of poisons is going to be well received in a poison-based meta. So, if the damage from poison is really that redonkulous and the buffs and the changes to the tree really are that good, then Vol Molten Strike and all of its projectiles that you're going to be able to apply might actually open the door for players to league start with a Molten Strike style of meta. Vol Cleave, none of us, I don't think, would be predicting Cleave would be in the top 10 of an opening weekend of a league, probably in 100 years, except with the changes that they made during the 320 patch cycle, which is that Vol Cleave has a mini headhunter stack into it. If you kill a rare mob with your Vol Cleave, and Vol Cleave, of course, also has a culling effect, so you're going to kill stuff with it. If you kill the rare mob, you're going to steal a stat. You got a little mini headhunter buff. Who the heck doesn't want to be running around with a little mini headhunter buff as you are progressing through the 10x story campaign and as you begin your mapping progress? I think that if players are going to choose to play melee, there's always a player percentage of the player base who does choose to do that. Maybe it'll be a larger percentage of the player base that'll try and do this. Maybe it'll even be players who have never gotten a headhunter, those folks out there who have never experienced what it's like to have a headhunter but want to really push or want to really try for something like that. I think they might be trying Vol Cleave. Last up is Explosive Arrow. There's a couple of different ways that it can be built. There's a couple of different ascendancies that it can be played on. It's relatively versatile, and it allows for both a smooth leveling experience as well as a strong early mapping experience. I think Explosive Arrow has got a solid shot of being inside the top 10. It's much less risky, in my opinion, of making a prediction that it'd be in the top 10 than, say, Vol Molten Strike or Vol Cleave. Two honorable mentions that might be up there. It really just depends on how ambitious players are feeling, and then also combining with how good those skills are. If players are feeling ambitious, they might try one of the two newer skills, where Smite, of course, is a long-time skill, but Vol Smite looks amazing for smashing entire screens of content, and players might try that out early on over the opening weekend. We might see it kind of like what we saw with some skills during the Lake of Kalandra League, where maybe day 2 is when it starts to crop up, and maybe day 3 if it's really good and players start to catch on that it's really good for clearing whole packs and whole screens. Frozen Legion looks to be the new skill. Here's my word of caution. If you are new to Path of Exile and you've never heard me give a word of caution like this before, then please take this seriously. Generally speaking, when Grinding Gear Games releases new skill gems, what we used to say back in my day was if they release 3 skill gems, 2 of them are going to be virtually unplayable the first league that they come out, and 1 of them is going to be borderline broken, and you're going to have to play it. Just because it's going to be fun, not that you have to play anything. In fact, if you feel like you have to do something in a video game, you're probably playing it wrong. You should be having fun, not feeling like you have to do something. But anyway, off my lawn rants aside, Frozen Legion looks to me to be one of those skills where it's either just going to be totally busted, as in bad on release, or totally busted OP, and it's going to feel awesome to play and clear incredibly quickly and take on bosses incredibly well. So the question is, who's going to try it? Who's going to test it? Who's going to actually play it in the most optimal way? And then who's going to optimize that optimal way in order to further dispense the knowledge that Frozen Legion is either atrocious or is awesome? Well, thanks so much for joining us today for today's discussion. I'd love to hear your predictions down below about skill gems that you think will be popular over the opening weekend of the 320 Forbidden Sanctum League. What are your thoughts about the opening 3 days? Do you have any particular skill gems that you think are going to stand out or really make themselves the go-to leveling skill? Sometimes that happens over opening weekends where players are playing and leveling, and all of a sudden everybody's got their POBs ready, everybody's got their snacks, and everybody's done all their chores, and everybody's already looked through and siphoned through hundreds of builds during the opening lead-up weekend. And then it comes down to it, and everybody just chooses like the same skill because we saw one guy playing it and it looked amazing, right? Do you think there's going to be one skill that does that? Last question for you today is, which is better, ice cream in a cone or ice cream in a bowl? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and if you agreed or disagreed with me. Regardless, I hope the upcoming 320 Forbidden Sanctum League is the league a Mirror of Kalandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.